Hello, hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is your girl Mitzi, and this is Mitzi. Let's think about it. Today we are thinking about psychological horror. Oh my goodness, isn't that a thinker? And luckily, I have Wes here who's going to help us think about this in a whole new way. So thank you so much for coming onto my show, sharing your time and your perspective. Let's dive right in. When you hear the word psychological horror, what does that make you think about?
It makes me think about where you're experiencing something because here's the thing with art, capital A, not art. The point of art, whether it's actual like visual arts or storytelling or music, the point of the arts is to get the viewer, the listener, the reader, etc. The point is to get them to feel something, to feel some sort of emotion, right? As opposed to think about something. Thinking is like, logic, math, dialectic, that sort of thing. But the point of art is about emotions. And so the specific emotions that horror as an overall genre is trying to get you to feel are feelings obviously of fear, disgust, dread, etc. And so there's different subcategories of horror. Like for example, the Friday the 13th movies, right? They're not really psychological horror because it's just like a giant dude with a machete who's just like cutting down horny teenagers, chasing them around the woods. It's not really about the psychology, it's just about the fear of escaping the monster or the killer, right? Whereas the
Yeah.
psychological horror is more about you know, there's a little bit more emphasis on the internal world of the person, right?
Okay.
So that they might have done something in their life in the past that they're guilty about, that they're trying to hide, or maybe something happened to them, like some sort of trauma or something that they're trying to kind of suppress. Um, and the point of psychological horror is to say, hey, look, for this character who has this dark past for whatever reason, let's see what happens if we create a situation where we force them to confront it. And if that's the center of the story, if that's the primary focus of the story, then you could say that's psychological horror. So that's
I,
what I would say. Yeah.
well, I like your interpretation. I like your understanding because it gives you a broad perspective on what horror really is and the divisions that it can actually fall into. Because when you think of um what I did last summer, I think of, oh, that guilt, that shame, that repressing of what they did and how somebody found out and somebody knew and now they're blackmailing them and killing them until they're all dead. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
So it really is interesting to think about how, horror has evolved in such a way where it was just, oh, to scare you. And now it's about truly like trying to make you feel something. You know what I mean? Have you feel that fear? Have you feel that worry, that anxiety, that pressure of whatever the movie or book is trying to display. So it's just like, is there any way that horror can help people, in your opinion?
Yeah, interestingly enough, yeah, and I think maybe to help it would be good to step back. So, sometimes you hear this term. There's like the beautiful and the majestic, or to use an older term, like a beautiful and the sublime. And there's this idea that and it's a very old idea. Like, like my Brotherhood of the Wolf graphic novel, dark fantasy series has a lot of horror in it, including the psychological kind. And a lot of times it's based off of Islamic mysticism. And one of the big things about Islamic mysticism is like, even if you like look in like the Quran, it's like this constant tension and release. This idea of like God as a majestic being who, creates exploding galaxies and lions that like rip out the throats of deer, etc. But at the same time creates, moms loving their babies, um, you know, uh, just like you know, uh, rain that people can grow, drink from, and grow crops from, etc. So there's always this idea of like the majestic and the beautiful, and essentially a person can interpret the world as seeing those two attributes constantly, um, constantly being engaged with each other. Just to give you like kind of a funny example, I don't know if you've seen recently the story of there's this tech CEO guy. The company's called Astronomer, and Yeah, it's all over social media. So essentially, he's a tech CEO and he's married, right? And he has an employee who's like the chief HR person, like the chief of people. And we're at a Coldplay concert together, right? And you
Oh,
know how
that
like,
one.
yeah,
Oh, okay. Yeah, I just heard about it this morning. I didn't even realize.
yeah. And so like how sometimes concerts they do kissing cams where they just like take random like they just put somebody on the spot like with a well this guy was holding this his HR lady and they're like all lovey-dovey and then the camera's on them and like oh shit and so because like they're at the very least he's married. I'm not sure about her but like there's cheating going on clearly and so they're like trying to hide and etc. And somebody made the joke that it's been years since Coldplay made a single, but tonight they made two. But the reason I mentioned this example is like you think about those guys, right? So like, oh, they're in love. So there's this kind of like lovey-dovey and stuff going on, and so you could say that that's the element of the beautiful, right? But then they're cheating, and so they're eventually caught, and then there's all this humiliation and home breaking, etc. And now that's the majestic aspect. So you could say like that's an exaggerated version of like these constant two attributes constantly working throughout the world, and you could say our entire lives are like that, right? And so and that goes even as far as the fiction that we like to see. So like the beautiful, like for example, like a more beautiful genre is like love, right? The love genre, the romance genre, where it's just literally all about love. Um, but there are but then there's the sublime, where people are kind of attracted to the darker aspects of thing, like death and decay and pain, etc. And that's not necessarily to say that that in and of itself is a bad thing. It's just the human being kind of getting in tune with two different forms of this sounds really new agey and cringe, but two different forms of energy within them, right? Two different, like it's the yin and the yang, right? And so horror, what it specifically does is that it looks at the majestic, the sublime aspects of things, particularly about how we as human beings deal with death, right? Because we all know we're all gonna die. I'm sorry if this is news to anybody. We're all gonna
Oh
die.
no.
At a certain point, all those chocolate eclairs that we've been eating, it's gonna end one of these days. And probably it's gonna, depending on how many chocolate eclairs we eat, it might end sooner rather than later. But anyway, so there's this idea that people are constantly, uh, you know, thinking about death, even if they're not consciously thinking about it. So with horror, it's like, okay, let's explore that. And a lot of times it ties that in with themes of guilt and punishment.
Yeah.
So that's why
Yeah.
a movie like I Know What You Did Last Summer hits so well because it kind of hits on those multiple things. It hits death, the idea of death and our mortality, but also hits the thing of guilt. And I think some of the best horror deals with those two things, like the skeleton in the closet of the protagonist and them having to come to terms, deal with dying or having their loved ones dying, etc. So that's why people I think really enjoy horror, even if they don't like it so much, and even if it's seen somewhat like somewhat lowbrow. Like what's the thing with the clown, the
It's
Terrifier?
oh
No,
God.
Terrifier. Yeah, so that's a very like you have to have a strong stomach to see that one. That's a where it's just like this clown. He doesn't speak and he just goes around and murders people horribly. and like I'm looking at this. I'm like, okay. I'm just like giggling and laughing as I'm watching it, and my wife is like, she's not watching it. She's like not seeing what I'm saying on the screen. She's like, "What are you doing? Why are you laughing?" And I'm like, "It's just so over the top and just ridiculous." But at the same time, I mean, it's hitting those horror genre beats where it's like you are like having that catharsis of like, yeah, I'm coming to terms with death and losing it, and so I think that's why people really like horror, and it's not going to go away, and especially anytime soon, because even logistically in Hollywood, horror movies are cheaper to make than superhero movies, for example. You don't really need CGI. You just need a dude, maybe in some sort of costume, a clown costume or whatever, and maybe just like set it in a house or an abandoned warehouse or in the woods. And so that's why I think you're starting to see something of a renaissance of horror, of good horror movies coming out from Hollywood recently.
Yeah, I think you brought up a lot of good major points. I think I just want to touch on to that. to the one earlier we talked about the Coldplay situation, they actually found out that she was married too, that they both were married. So I mean, on social media and the internet, they do their investigation, they do their little dirt, and then they ended up finding all of that out, and they blasted it. But anyways, that's no here nor there. But I do think that I agree with you that horror movies is one that people most definitely look into and kind of use as like a reference point. You know what I mean? Because there's some truth to every movie, every horror movie, doesn't matter if it's spiritual or not, or scary or not, or psychological or not. Like there's some a little bit of truth to it because everybody hides um truth in between and in between the dramas and the exaggerated, you know what I mean? So just like people really use that as a reference point at some point, you know what I mean? Because like even with the Saw movies, you know what I mean? Like people realize like they had to stay on their P's and Q's or somebody might capture them up and put them in a creepy, crazy
And
situation.
and by the way, spoiler alert, like for the first Saw movie, like the main villain of that first Saw movie, he's a guy who was like I think dying of cancer or something. Like he knew he was gonna die, and he wanted to put people in horrific situations so that he could see who's going to appreciate life and what they have. So that's
Yeah.
literally like just hitting that over and over again. People don't think about that, right? They just think like, "Oh my God, this is puppet thing and I'm having to like I'm locked in here and what am I going to do?" But if you really think about what's happening underneath the surface, it's really forcing the reader or the viewer to come to terms with like, you know, we're all gonna die. Am I ready psychologically, spiritually for it? And so the better that a horror a piece of horror fiction can do that, I think the more people will like it.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely. Because even the movie Seven Deadly Sins with
oh yeah,
the detective looking for that murderer and he was claiming that he's doing God's work and he's killing all the people that was doing all those sins and all this stuff like that happens more often than not. You know what I mean? And people don't realize like a lot of the times like this horror that is being displayed in movies and in books, it's just a reality that was. You know what I mean? So I think it really does help people like release out like what they know inside. And when they put it in a book or they put it in a movie and they allow their secrets to be acknowledged by the world and just say, oh, it's fantasy, it's exaggerated. We spiced it up. You know what I mean? I think that's just a cover coat because a lot of the times authors and artists, they really do reveal their pain, reveal their horrors into a book. You know what I mean? I even read one time where a guy had a dream of a demon and he put the demon into the movie and that's how he seen it. You know what I mean? So it's just like it just shows like we really don't know unless we allow ourselves to determine what is real and what is not. You know what I mean? I mean, like we are the ones that hold that value of what it really means to me. So it's like, what really got you into horror? When did you realize, like, oh, I'm into this?
yeah. I think for me, it's just like I tend to be into two kind of genres, right? One of them is fantasy,
Yeah.
um, and the other is horror. And I always liked both. And they explore different things. Horror, we talked about what it explores, like death, guilt, etc. Fantasy actually explores at a deep, under the surface level, it explores how to live the best life. Like, how do you live a life with, how do you live the life with, with vitality and with creativity and etc. And like a classic example of that, it's very old school, but I think it makes the point is like The Wizard of Oz, where you
Oh,
notice like the old movie, like the original movie. So it's based off
yeah.
a book, but then there's the movie. And then like the movie starts off like she's in her regular world on her farm in Kansas, and it's like black and white, right? But then she's transported to the world of Oz, and then everything's in color, right?
Yeah.
And so this idea, and then she has to solve problems and figure things out in Oz to go back home. But when she goes back home, she sees things differently, and so she lives a life that's more rich. And I think when she goes back home, even though she's back in Kansas, it's not black and white anymore. It's color, like how it was when she was in. So it's that idea where it's like and the Narnia books, right? It's like, okay, they're
Yes.
living in Britain and
Yeah.
it's just like then they go into Narnia, they essentially grow up there, they come back, and for the most part they're like more mature, more wiser, etc. Lord of the Rings, like the hobbits, they're around, smoking weed in the Shire. Then they're sent on a quest to throw the ring in the thing, and just that journey, all that struggle. They come back and they're changed, right? And they're more mature, etc. And so that's really the idea of fantasy. It's like you're how do you learn to live the best life, um, to the best extent. And so for me, I was always interested in like combining the two
Yeah.
genres, horror and dark fantasy. And so that's why I'm sorry, horror and fantasy, and that results in something like dark fantasy, right?
Yeah.
Which is like fantasy with like horror elements. And that's what that's one of the why I decided, I wanted to do my Brotherhood of the Wolf graphic novel series, which is like combines the two because um it's like I wanted that idea of like, yes, the protagonists, they're experiencing magical things, but I want those magical things to be horrific, right? And I don't want all of them to live. I want that catharsis where it's like, yes, um, we're 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 seeing living life in a different way creatively, but also we're coming to terms with death and stuff like that. And so that's
Yeah.
I've always been keen on combining those two specific genres. I
No,
am,
I don't blame you. I think those two together, it's like peanut butter and jelly. They just work. You know what I mean?
yeah,
They just work because if you really think about it, you when you add fantasy, you're literally just twisting truth and adding a little razzle dazzle to it because everyone's life has a little bit of horror to it. But sometimes when you add that little extra exaggeration, that drama to it, it makes it more like surreal. Like, oh my goodness, how would I deal with that? How would I handle a big dragon coming at me? And you know what I mean, killed my mom, what would I do? Like in the character continued on walking, but you might actually stop your whole life and dig a hole and stay there. You know what I mean? Because people don't know what they're going to do until they're actually confronted with it. But when you read books and you watch movies, you put yourself in that situation and then you allow yourself to really think about it. And then yeah, it's like you said, it gives you that twist because of Narnia and Lord of the Rings. I mean, all of these great authors, all of these great directors, all of these great movies and shows that just depict the reality of what will you do to survive, you know what I mean, what will you do to continue forward.
yeah.
And I think that's the beauty of writing is that we can kill people off and not actually go to jail. You know what I mean? And like my first chapter of my novel, somebody dies, and it's a good thing because that's one has to go. You know what I mean? But it makes the
Yeah.
story, and I think that's the beauty of just writing because it's like you can see it without it actually being in front of you. You know what I mean? And I guess it leads me to my next question, like why did you even start writing?
Yeah, so it was it was
I
really to
think
scratch my own itch. Yeah, it was
okay.
really to scratch my own itch. I had to think deeply about that question because I was always into the creative stuff when I was younger, and there's a certain, you know,
I know.
there's a certain element like for people who are like in the creative stuff, especially if they're extroverted,
Yeah.
where it's like, hey, look at me, right? But I think at a certain point, you're like, you get older and you're like, yeah, I don't want to do that anymore. I want to be low key. But for me, I feel like I had to get back into it because I was seeing what was out there, and there was nothing really that was solving the
Sparking.
problems that I was seeing. So,
Yeah.
like for example, one of them, I mean, it's different layers, right? So, like in the fantasy genre, um, fantasy was always there, right? I mentioned like Alice in Wonderland or Wizard
Yeah.
of Oz. These are like old things, right? Um, but then J.R.R. Tolkien came with the Lord of the Rings and he changed everything, right? But for the pretty much a good chunk of the 20th century after Tolkien, like everyone was just kind of doing a Lord of the Rings clone. It was just so like it's like, oh, yes, it's like pretty much his stuff, just like with
Yeah.
maybe
It
a
was
different twist. It was yeah, it was very samey. Now
yeah.
there was like a genre of heroic fantasy which is separate from Tolkien, like Conan the Barbarian, which is less epic fantasy and more heroic fantasy. So there's always that stuff going around, which is cool. But for the most part, people are like, yeah, we want to do the Tolkien thing. And so that kept happening up until like I think the mid to late 90s, where somebody like George R. R. Martin came with the Song of Ice and Fire series, upon which the Game of Thrones TV show is based off of. And that was like, whoa, because now it's like your characters are more gray. The world was more gritty, except, and so it was dealing with some of those, it was introducing more dark fantasy in the fantasy world. But now I
Yeah.
think people just just kept are keeping trying to do the now they're trying to be like George R. R. Martin and just like repeating the same stuff over and over again. And so we're at an impasse where it's like there's the fantasy market is saturated with so much stuff of varying levels of quality.
Yeah.
And now what's happening right now with the fantasy market is this idea of romantasy. I don't know if you've heard of that romance. So essentially, it's romance, like a combination of romance and fantasy, which is fine. You could for sure combine those genres. But now it seems like if you go to I'm not joking, Mitzi, if you go, I literally did this a few days ago. I went to local Barnes and Nobles here in the greater Seattle area and there's like a fantasy section. And one side it said cozy fantasy, and the other side said dark fantasy. I'm like, well, let me check out the dark fantasy section. I looked, and it was just like all this romance stuff. And I'm like, that's really weird. Like, where's the actual,
Dark.
where's the stuff?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So for me, it's just like there's these constant trends happening, and I'm like, listen, I just want to tell a great story that's set in a setting that people haven't seen before, hence the 15th century Ottoman Empire, right?
Yeah.
Because like our characters, like they're literally like some of them have turbans and wear harem pants, which you don't typically see. Generally, when you do a fantasy, it's like a fake version of Britain or France or something.
Yeah.
But we're introducing monsters that are like very that I think monsters that touch on nerves of modern people more than just like rehashing the same werewolf vampire stuff. Even though we have
Yeah.
some of those, but we interpret it differently. So that even though it's in a like late medieval setting, it hits people modern people in a very different way. So for example, in the first story arc, we have one of the main monsters is not just a demon, but a demonic automaton, right? And so that's my way of exploring AI and how we're dealing with AI. But essentially, it's like a demonic cyborg, but in the late 15th century. Another thing is like these these like fae type fairy creatures that abduct children and suck out their energy, right? And that deals with like
Ooh.
people always, like modern people always being worried about their parents. In the past, like I'm a millennial. I don't know if you're a millennial or if you're maybe but
No, I'm a
like
millennial.
yeah. So Gen Xers, one of their issues was like their parents would just leave them
Yeah.
and just be like, it's to the point where they had to have commercials like, it's 10 o'clock. Do you know where your child is at?
I
Right?
know. I remember those commercials. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, but now I think it's a little bit different where it's not like that kids are outside and the parents don't know where they are. Like it could be that kids are inside, but they're
They're
dealing with
yeah, they're on their phone. Yeah,
and you don't know what
they're
you don't know what they're looking at all the time, etc. And so this idea that like there are forces out there that are always trying to like prey on your vulnerable children, and you might not have full control of that, right? And so that tapping into that fear. Because
yeah, I
anybody
love
could,
that.
yeah, so anybody could be like, "Oh, here's another zombie." I'm like, "No, no,
Yeah,
that's the come on." That's so for me,
it gets
that's
played out. It gets so played out when it comes to the same old because I'm with you because in the early 2000s I felt like it was just the same old. It's just reruns of the same thing, just duplicates and then nothing really new. So it's nice to know that that's what you're doing. You're heading in that direction where you're trying to branch out and make people realize like we can think out of the box. We can truly make something new. Yeah, everything's been said under the sun before, but it doesn't mean that it can't have its own twists and turns and
yeah, yeah.
little things. You truly do make a difference. And I know time is catching up to us because I'm looking at the time and I'm like, I can't believe it's already that's this. So it's like, what can be some truly lasting words that you can leave us off with to keep on thinking?
Yeah, what I would say is, back to what we talked about. We're all gonna die. We all have a limited amount of time here, right? And I think fiction is a great way to spend some of that time. But I think a lot of time, people think that because there's a lot out there that just because something's on Netflix doesn't mean it's good, right?
Yeah.
Just because something's on Amazon doesn't mean it's good. And so you have a limited amount of time in addition to like paying the bills, dealing with your family, etc. for like leisure stuff, especially as it relates to fiction. So really look at the stuff that doesn't need to seem deep, but look at the stuff that might cause you to have a really strong reaction in the way that it promises. If it promises horror, it should scare you. If it promises romance, it should make you feel feelings of, love. If it promises action, it should make you feel like powerful. So if you're looking at fiction and it's not fulfilling on its promise, that's fine. Just stop. You don't have to read the thing or watch the thing from end to end like it's an obligation, right? You could just stop and move on to something else. Like, life's too short. So that's what I would say. And
Yeah.
if people wanted to uh, experience the emotions associated with dark fantasy, they could, check out my website where we kind of give a if they sign up, they get a free trailer of kind of our series, and if it hits, great. If not, then no problem. It's all free. So the website is talesofkhair.com. So it's TALESOFKHAYR.com.
Yeah, perfect. There you go, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you guys enjoyed this conversation because I sure did. I truly did. Thank you so much for this time, allowing me to pick your brain on horror and the psychological portion of it. Because, man, I've been waiting for somebody to come to me and say, let's think about this. You know what I mean? Because I
Yeah,
get all of my topics by individuals like yourself who have these great ideas, and I just want to just pick your guys' brain because, man, I've been thinking about these things and I've been alone, and now I'm not no longer alone. So yes, please go check out Wiz. I have access to his website in the description. If you're listening audio, if you're on YouTube, it's right there. It's the link. Click on it, and it goes directly to his website. Oh my goodness, you'll find so many great content so that you can continue on thinking, ladies and gentlemen. Because isn't that the point? Yes, it is. So always keep thinking. Bye.